Pine Ridge, Colorado, September 1932. The tobacco smoke curled lazy through the afternoon light, dancing in the beams that sliced through the study windows. Judge William Carlisle, 90 years old and sharp as the day he first took the bench, packed his pipe with the careful precision of a man who had performed this ritual 10,000 times. Across from him, his grandson Thomas sat with the restless energy of 18 years trying hard to look contrite and failing miserably. The boy had a black eye, fresh, purple blooming at the edges like a storm cloud. His knuckles were scraped raw. The judge lit his pipe, drew deep, and let the silence stretch between them like a taut wire. He had learned long ago that silence was a judge's most powerful tool. Most men couldn't bear it. They filled it with confessions, with justifications, with truth that would otherwise stay buried. Thomas lasted 47 seconds. "I know what you're going to say, Grandpa. That fighting doesn't solve anything. That I should have walked away. That I'm throwing away my future over a girl." The judge smiled around his pipe stem. "Actually, I was going to ask if you won." The boy blinked. Confusion replaced defiance in his young face. What? The fight. Did you win?" "Yes, sir." Knocked Billy Henderson flat on his back in front of half the school. "Good." The judge leaned back in his leather chair, the one that had witnessed 60 years of legal contemplation. "Then we can talk about whether it was worth it. But first, let me tell you a story." Thomas shifted, suddenly wary. His grandfather's stories had a way of circling back like hunting hawks striking when you least expected. "You asked me once about honor," the judge continued, smoke wreathing his weathered face. "About what it means to be a man of principle in a world that doesn't always reward principle. You want to know if fighting for what's right is worth the cost." He paused, studying his grandson with eyes that had seen the frontier die and cities rise, that had watched the old century give way to the new. "Let me tell you about the bravest person I ever met. She wasn't a soldier, wasn't a lawman, wasn't anyone you'd read about in history books. She was an obese woman that an entire town treated like garbage, until the day she did something not one man in Millridge had the courage to do." Thomas leaned forward despite himself. The judge drew on his pipe again, letting the ember glow bright orange in the dim study. When he spoke, his voice had changed, dropped 60 years, became the voice of a young circuit judge riding the Wyoming Territory in 1872, when the frontier was still raw and the laws were newer than the grudges. "This happened the year I turned 30. I was assigned to the Wyoming Circuit, traveling from town to town, settling disputes and dispensing what passed for justice in those days. September of that year found me in a settlement called Mill Ridge, population 400, and every single one of them believed they knew the truth about Grace Bennett. The name hung in the air like an incantation. "Your great-grandmother," the judge said quietly, "the woman who saved your mother's life before she was even old enough to remember." Thomas's eyes went wide. He knew his grandmother had died when he was small, knew she'd been respected, even revered in her later years. But the stories had always been vague, sanitized. Family legend without the blood and bone. "What I'm about to tell you is the truth," Judge Carlisle said. "Not the polite version we tell at Sunday dinners. The real story. The one about courage and cowardice. About a town that chose cruelty and a woman who chose to stand when everyone else sat silent." He settled deeper into his chair, pipe smoke rising like the ghosts of 60 years past. "It begins on a Tuesday. Market day, when a mountain man stumbled into town carrying death in his arms, and the only person who stepped forward was the one everyone had decided wasn't worth saving, herself. September 1872, Mill Ridge, Wyoming Territory. The sun beat down on the market square with the kind of heat that made tempers short and mercy shorter. Grace Bennett stood behind her bread table in the same spot she had occupied every Tuesday and Friday for 2 years, the corner furthest from the town well, where the dust was thickest and the foot traffic thinnest. Her position wasn't accidental. It was assigned. Unspoken, but absolute. The way everything in her life had become since the day she buried her newborn son and watched her husband walk into the mountains never to return. At 32, Grace carried weight the frontier didn't forgive. 250 pounds on a frame that should have held half that if you believed the whispers. And everyone in Millridge believed the whispers. Soft curves in a world that demanded hardness. Flesh where bone should show. Her brown hair streaked with premature gray hung in a thick braid down her back. Her dress faded calico mended so many times the original pattern had become a ghost strained across her chest and hips. She had learned to make herself small despite her size, to occupy space without claiming it, to exist without demanding existence. 2 loaves of bread sat on her weathered table. Simple loaves, but perfect in their way. Crusty golden with that particular smell that made even those who despised her reach for their coin purses. Bread didn't require conversation. Bread didn't judge. Bread was transaction without relationship, and transaction was all Grace had left. Mrs. Eleanor Hutchinson approached the table without looking at Grace's face. The banker's wife, 50 years old and proud of every year because they were years spent on the right side of respectability. She dropped coins on the wood with the same care she might use disposing of refuse. 2 loaves. Grace's hands moved automatically wrapping the bread in brown paper. Thank you, ma'am. Mrs. Hutchinson didn't wait for change, didn't acknowledge Grace's quiet gratitude. She simply gathered her purchase and moved away as if proximity itself carried risk of contamination. Grace swept the coins into her apron pocket and resumed her stillness. Around her, the market thrummed with life she wasn't permitted to join. Martha Sullivan laughed with the fabric merchant, her hands gesturing wide as she described her daughter's upcoming wedding. Thomas Green haggled good-naturedly with the blacksmith over horseshoes, their voices carrying the easy confidence of men whose reputations remained intact. Children darted between stalls, their shrieks of play piercing the afternoon haze. Grace existed in the spaces between these moments, in the silence that followed laughter when someone noticed her listening, in the careful paths people carved to avoid standing too close. Invisibility had become her armor, silence her only protection. She had learned the rules of her exile through painful repetition. Don't speak first. Don't meet eyes. Don't smile. It implies presumption of welcome. Keep your hands busy. Your head down, your presence forgettable. Above all, don't remind them of what you lost, what you failed to keep, what your body promised and couldn't deliver. The boarding house where she rented a single room took most of what she earned. Mrs. Griswold, the landlady, charged Grace twice what she charged other tenants, a penalty for being the kind of woman who might drive away respectable boarders. The remaining coins bought flour, yeast, salt, and the small luxuries that made survival bearable. A bit of honey when the bees had been generous, an apple when the harvest came in, a scrap of ribbon she had hidden in her drawer and never worn. Grace had been married once, briefly, to a man who had seen her softness as promise rather than failing. Robert Bennett had courted her with quiet determination, unbothered by the whispers that questioned why any man would choose a woman of her size. They had built a small life together, a cabin on borrowed land, hope for children, plans that felt solid enough to withstand frontier harshness. Then came the pregnancy. Difficult from the start. Grace's body, which the town had already deemed excessive, swelled to proportions that drew stares even from women who should have understood. The midwife clicked her tongue at every visit, muttering about complications, about women who weren't built for bearing. The baby came too early, too small, his cries too weak to last beyond sunrise. Robert held their son as he died, then carried the tiny body to the cemetery himself. He didn't speak for 3 days. On the 4th day, he told Grace he needed to check the trap line in the high country. He kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender it broke something inside her, and walked into the mountains with his rifle and bedroll. They found his body 2 weeks later at the bottom of a ravine. The sheriff ruled it an accident, but Grace knew the truth. Her husband had been too kind to speak aloud. He couldn't bear to look at her anymore, couldn't bear the weight of their shared failure, couldn't bear to keep pretending their life together still held any promise. The town's sympathy lasted exactly as long as the funeral. After that came the whispers, the sideways glances, the slow, methodical exclusion that taught Grace her place. Women who had once invited her to quilting circles suddenly had no room at their tables. Men who had tipped their hats now looked past her as if she were fog. Children learned from their parents' averted eyes that Grace Bennett was someone to ignore, someone whose very presence carried the taint of tragedy. But Grace survived. She learned to bake bread with flour she couldn't afford to waste, to coax yeast to life in a boarding house room with no proper kitchen, to produce loaves crusty and rich enough that Even those who despised her would buy them. She was arranging her remaining loaves when the commotion started. At first it was just a ripple, voices rising at the far end of the square, people turning to look. Then the ripple became a wave, bodies pressing back, creating space around something Grace couldn't yet see. The market's cheerful chaos died into uneasy murmuring. A man stumbled into the square. Even from a distance, Grace could see his desperation. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a rancher's rough clothing, canvas pants stained with dirt and worse, a shirt that might have been blue once but had faded to the color of old bruises. Dark hair fell across his forehead matted with sweat. His face, weathered by sun and wind, carried the kind of exhaustion that went beyond lack of sleep into something closer to spiritual depletion. In his arms, wrapped in a blanket that had once been white, was an infant. The baby's cries cut through the afternoon like broken glass. Thin, desperate. Sounds that spoke of suffering Grace recognized from the single night she had held her own son. These weren't the lusty wails of a healthy child demanding attention. These were the sounds of a life slipping away. The man turned in the center of the square, his eyes searching the crowd that had instinctively recoiled. Grace watched him pivot like a wounded animal seeking help from predators. Please, his voice cracked with the weight of days without hope. Please, someone. She needs milk. She needs a wet nurse. She's dying. Silence answered him, not the peaceful silence of a moment's pause, the deliberate silence of people choosing not to respond. Grace watched the calculation happen in faces around the square. The mental arithmetic of risk versus reward. The social cost of association versus the moral weight of letting a child die. For every person there, the math came out the same. Stay silent, stay safe. The man turned toward a group of women clustered near the fabric merchant's stall. Martha Sullivan stood among them, her expression frozen somewhere between pity and disgust. She had an infant at home, 6 months old, still nursing. Everyone knew it. Mrs. Sullivan, the man's voice held naked pleading. Please, I know you're nursing your youngest. I can pay. I can give you whatever you need. Martha's husband stepped forward. Nathan Sullivan, blacksmith, strong enough to bend iron but not strong enough to stand against his town's judgment. He placed himself between the stranger and his wife like a human wall. Move along, Morgan. You're not welcome here. Morgan. The name triggered recognition, even in Grace's corner of isolation. Jack Morgan, the rancher from High Valley, the mountain man whose wife had died birthing this very child 3 weeks ago, the man the town whispered about in tones usually reserved for discussing criminals or madmen. I'm not asking for charity. Jack Morgan's voice rose with desperation that made several people step back. I have money. I have land. I can pay whatever you want. He shifted the baby, fumbling in his pocket with one hand while trying to support her weight with the other. Coins spilled onto the dirt, silver catching sunlight, rolling into the dust like scattered hopes. I can pay anything you want. It's not about money. Thomas Green stepped forward, the banker, voice carrying the weight of community judgment like a gavel. You know what people say about you, Morgan, about what happened to your wife, about what you did up there in those mountains. I didn't do anything. The anguish in Jack Morgan's voice silenced the square completely. Catherine died bringing our daughter into this world, that's all. That's the only truth. A doctor from Cheyenne examined everything. Natural causes, breech birth. She fought for 3 days, but she couldn't. His voice broke, shattered on the rocks of grief, still too fresh to speak without bleeding. The baby's cries intensified, a sound so thin and desperate, it seemed impossible anything that fragile could survive another hour. Then why won't you let anyone on your land? Someone called from the back of the crowd. Anonymous accusation floating like poison gas. Why do you keep everyone away? What are you hiding up there in that valley? Jack Morgan's jaw clenched. Grace could see him fighting for control, struggling to keep his voice level when everything in his posture screamed rage and grief and the kind of desperation that made men dangerous. I'm not hiding anything. I'm trying to keep my daughter alive. She won't take cow's milk, won't take goat's milk. She needs... His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried across the silent square. She needs a mother's milk, and I can't. The baby's cries reached a pitch that made Grace's chest ache, made her arms remember weight they hadn't held in 2 years, made her body respond in ways she thought it had forgotten. Please, Brayton, Jack Morgan whispered, turning in another slow circle, meeting eyes that immediately looked away. Someone, she's just a baby. She hasn't done anything wrong. She doesn't deserve to die for my sins, real or imagined. Please. Grace's hands gripped the edge of her table. Her breathing had gone shallow. Every instinct screamed at her to stay still, to remain in her assigned corner, to not draw attention. Getting involved would only bring more judgment, more exclusion, more confirmation of everything the town already believed about her capacity for failure. But that sound, that terrible weakening cry, she knew that sound, had heard it once before, had held a dying child in her own arms while his cries grew softer, softer, until they stopped altogether and the world became silence. What about the widow Bennett? The voice came from somewhere in the crowd. Grace couldn't see who had spoken, but she felt every eye in the square turned toward her corner, felt the weight of collective attention like a physical force pressing against her chest. Laughter rippled through the gathering. Not full laughter, the cruel chuckle of people sharing a joke at someone's expense, the sound of superiority wrapped in mockery. The Bennett woman? Mrs. Hutchinson's voice dripped with disdain, sharp enough to cut. She couldn't even keep her own baby alive, even if she could help what makes anyone think she has anything to offer. It's been 2 years. Martha Sullivan's voice carried false sweetness that made the cruelty worse, like honey poured over broken glass. Whatever milk she had is long gone, she's useless. More laughter, harder this time, building on itself like a wave gathering strength. Grace felt her face burn, felt the familiar shame wash over her like dirty water. She should stay quiet, should accept the dismissal, should let this moment pass without making everything worse. But Jack Morgan had stopped turning. He was looking directly at her, his eyes locking onto hers across the crowded square. And in his gaze, Grace saw something that transcended desperation. She saw recognition, not of who she was, but of what she was. Another person the world had discarded, another soul carrying unbearable loss, another human being the town had decided wasn't worth saving. The baby's cry weakened, became little more than a whimper, the sound of a life flickering out like a candle in wind. And Grace Bennett made a choice. Her feet moved before her mind could stop them. The crowd parted as she stepped away from her table, not out of respect, out of shock. She had broken the unspoken rule, had claimed space, had demanded to be seen, had inserted herself into a moment where her presence wasn't wanted or warranted. She walked toward Jack Morgan with her head up, her shoulders back, her body taking up exactly as much room as it needed without apology. Each step felt like defiance, like revolution, like choosing herself after 2 years of accepting she had no right to choose anything. The whispers started immediately, hissing like disturbed snakes. What does she think she's doing? Someone should stop her. This is unseemly, disgraceful. Grace heard them all and kept walking. When she reached Jack Morgan, she stopped close enough to see the red veins in his eyes, the stubble darkening his jaw, the tremble in his arms from holding his daughter for what must have been hours, days, weeks of desperate searching. The baby lay in his arms, so small, so impossibly fragile, her skin carrying a grayish tint that spoke of starvation and struggle. Dark hair, wispy and sparse, framed a face that would have been beautiful if it weren't contorted with suffering. Her eyes, when they flickered open for a moment, were the deep blue of new life, not yet decided on its final color. Her lips moved weakly, searching for sustenance that hadn't come. "Let me see her," Grace said quietly. Jack Morgan's breath caught. Hope and fear warred across his weathered face. "You can help. You have milk. You can—" "I don't know." Grace's honesty felt like the only gift she could offer, the only thing she had left that wasn't tainted by failure and loss. "I don't know if I can help. I don't know if I have anything left to give, but I'm willing to try. That's all I'm asking." His voice broke on the last word, shattered into pieces that scattered like the coins at his feet. "Just try. Please, just try." He shifted the blanket, revealed the infant's face completely, and Grace felt her body respond before her mind caught up. deep in her chest, a sensation she hadn't experienced in 2 years, a tingling warmth, a sense of fullness, of purpose. Her breasts, which had dried up in the weeks after her son's death, suddenly felt heavy, tender, alive. "Where can we go?" Grace asked, her voice steady despite the chaos of sensation flooding through her. "Somewhere quiet, somewhere private. I have a room at the boarding house." Jack spoke quickly, words tumbling over each other in his haste. "I was going to head back to the ranch today, but I can pay for another night. We can go there and—" "No." Grace shook her head. Mrs. Griswold would never allow her in a mail boarder's room. The scandal alone would be enough to have her evicted. And she needed that room, needed the shelter it provided, even at twice the price everyone else paid. "We'll go to mine," she said. "It's not much, but it's private." "She'll charge you," Mrs. Hutchinson called out, her voice sharp enough to cut stone. "You know Griswold will charge you extra for bringing a man to your room, for entertaining, for whatever impropriety you're planning." Grace turned, met the banker's wife's eyes directly for the first time in 2 years. "Then she'll charge me. Some things are worth the price." The walk to the boarding house took less than 5 minutes, but felt like crossing continents. Behind them, the market erupted into renewed gossip. Grace could hear the voices rising, the speculation beginning, the story being shaped into something ugly before it had even finished unfolding. She didn't look back. Mrs. Griswold waited at the boarding house entrance, arms crossed, expression promising trouble. She was a narrow woman in every sense. Narrow body, narrow mind, narrow capacity for human kindness. "I don't allow men in my female tenants' rooms." The words came before Grace and Jack had even reached the steps. "You know the rules, Grace. This is a respectable establishment." "The baby is dying," Grace said simply. "We need privacy. I'll pay whatever extra you require." Mrs. Griswold's eyes narrowed further. Calculating. $5. The amount was obscene, more than a week's earnings from bread sales, more than Grace had saved in the past month. She heard Jack's sharp intake of breath beside her. "I'll pay it," he said, reaching for his pocket. "I have money. I can—" "No." Grace kept her eyes on the landlady, on the gatekeeper to the small room that was the only home she had left. "I'll pay it. This is my choice, my responsibility." She pulled the pouch from her apron, counted out coins that represented food she wouldn't buy, security she wouldn't have, a future that kept getting smaller with every choice she made. Mrs. Griswold snatched them with the efficiency of someone who had spent a lifetime profiting from others' desperation. "1 hour, the landlady said. "After that, I charge by the half hour." Grace didn't respond. She simply turned and led Jack Morgan up the narrow stairs, down the hallway to the very last door. Her door, her 8x10 world of survival. The room was exactly as she had left it that morning. A narrow bed pushed against one wall, its quilt her own work, patches of fabric salvaged from dresses she had worn in better days. A small table held her mixing bowl, her wooden spoon, the jar where she kept her sourdough starter alive. A single window curtainless looked out onto the alley where nothing ever happened. A washstand, a chamber pot, a trunk containing everything she owned. Grace closed the door behind them, shutting out the world and its judgment. Jack Morgan stood in the center of the room, still holding his daughter, looking lost in a way that went beyond physical displacement. A mountain man in a small box of a room. A man accustomed to vast spaces, now compressed into breathing the same air as a woman he didn't know. "I don't know what to do," he whispered, the confession raw as an open wound. "I don't know how to help her. I've tried everything. Cow's milk, goat's milk, sugar water. Nothing works. She just keeps getting weaker. And I can't lose her. I can't. She's all I have left of Catherine. She's all I have left of anything good." Grace moved to the bed, settled herself against the headboard. Her hands trembled as she began unbuttoning the front of her dress, exposing herself to a stranger, trusting that desperation would override any thought of impropriety. "Bring her here." Jack approached like a man walking on ice, each step careful, reverent, as if sudden movement might shatter this fragile possibility. He knelt beside the bed, easing the baby into Grace's outstretched arms. The weight of her was nothing. 4 pounds, maybe less. Grace could feel every tiny bone, every desperate breath, every heartbeat struggling against impossible odds. The baby's eyes opened, focused on Grace's face with the kind of intensity that seemed impossible from something so fragile, as if she knew, as if some instinct older than thought recognized this moment as her last chance. "Hello, little one," Grace whispered, her voice catching, breaking on the weight of what she was attempting, what she might fail at. Again. "Let's see if we can help each other." She adjusted her dress, exposed her breast. The tingling sensation had grown stronger, accompanied now by actual wetness, warmth spreading across her skin. Milk. After 2 years of drought, her body was producing milk. The baby turned her head, searching with instinct older than thought, older than words. The primal drive to survive. Grace guided her, positioned her, waited for the latch that might never come. For a long moment, nothing happened. The baby's mouth opened and closed against Grace's skin, weak movements that accomplished nothing. Grace felt despair rising, cold and familiar. Of course this wouldn't work. Of course her body would fail again. Of course she had offered hope she couldn't deliver. Then the latch came. The baby's mouth sealed around Grace's nipple with sudden, desperate strength. The pull was sharp, almost painful after so long. But Grace didn't flinch. She felt the milk let down, a sensation like nothing else, like opening a door that had been locked for years, like something broken becoming whole. The baby drank. Jack Morgan made a sound, half sob, half laugh, and buried his face against the mattress. His shoulders shook with the force of relief too powerful to contain. Grace kept her eyes on the infant in her arms, watching colors slowly return to gray skin, watching the frantic desperation ease into focused purpose, watching a life pull back from the edge of darkness. The baby's eyes drifted closed. Her tiny hand, which had been clenched tight, relaxed against Grace's breast. Minutes passed, the room filled with the only sound that mattered, the soft, rhythmic pattern of suckling and swallowing, of life being sustained, of connection being forged through the most primal act of motherhood. When the baby's sucking finally slowed, Grace gently detached her and shifted her to the other breast. The latch came easier this time. The baby drank with less desperation now, more contentment, as if her body finally believed sustenance would continue. Jack had lifted his head, was watching them with an expression Grace couldn't fully read. Gratitude, certainly, but also something else. Recognition, maybe. Or reverence, the look of a man witnessing miracle in a boarding house room. "What's her name?" Grace asked softly. "Lily." Jack's voice was rough, scraped raw by emotion. "Catherine wanted to name her Lily. She said—" He stopped, swallowed hard, fighting for composure. "She said every lily has thorns, but that doesn't make it any less beautiful. That survival doesn't diminish worth." "Lily," Grace repeated, looking down at the infant, whose eyes had drifted fully closed now, whose breathing had deepened into something approaching sleep. "It suits her. She's a fighter." "She is." Jack shifted from kneeling to sitting on the floor beside the bed, his big frame somehow fitting into the small space. "Just like her mother was. Catherine fought so hard. For 3 days she fought. The midwife said the baby was positioned wrong, that Catherine's hips were too narrow, that it was hopeless from the start. But Catherine wouldn't give up. She kept pushing, kept trying, kept believing she could bring Lily into the world and survive to raise her." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "She managed half of that." Grace felt the weight of his grief like a physical presence in the small room, pressing against the walls, making the air heavy. "I'm sorry for your loss. Everyone says that." Bitterness crept into Jack's tone, sharp edges cutting through the gratitude. "But no one actually cares. They're too busy deciding I'm responsible, that I did something wrong, that I'm dangerous. The doctor from Cheyenne came a week after Catherine died. Wanted to make sure Lily was healthy. He examined her, declared her fine, and left. But he must have said something in town, because after that the whispers got worse." He looked up at Grace, eyes meeting hers with brutal honesty. "People started saying I'd hurt Catherine, that I'd caused the difficult birth, that I was keeping Lily isolated because I was doing the same to her. That's why they wouldn't help you today. That's why they wouldn't help her." The distinction mattered to him. Grace understood. The town's cruelty toward him was one thing, but extending that cruelty to an innocent child, that was unforgivable. The world is very good at punishing people for things beyond their control, Grace said quietly. Jack's eyes met hers, searching. What did you do to deserve the way they treat you? The question should have felt invasive, should have triggered the familiar shame, the instinctive deflection. But Grace found she didn't mind answering. Maybe it was the intimacy of the moment. Maybe it was the shared understanding of exile. Maybe it was simply the relief of being asked directly instead of whispered about. I had a baby who died, she said, and then I had a husband who couldn't forgive me for it. That's not your fault. I know. The honesty surprised even Grace. But knowing something logically doesn't change how the world treats you. The town decided I was cursed, that my body was wrong, that I was someone to avoid. And once that judgment is passed, nothing you do can overturn it. You just learn to survive within its boundaries. Is that what you've been doing? Surviving. Grace looked down at Lily, at the baby whose face had relaxed completely into sleep, whose tiny hand rested against Grace's skin in perfect trust. It was, she said softly, until about 20 minutes ago. Understanding passed between them without need for further words. Something had shifted for both of them in this small room. The future Grace had resigned herself to endless days of invisible survival had just become impossible. Whatever happened next, she could never return to that corner of the market square and pretend nothing had changed. Lily stirred, made small sounds in her sleep. Grace gently stroked her cheek, marveling at the softness of infant skin, at the miracle of this tiny life still holding on. She'll need to eat again soon, Grace said quietly. Newborns eat every few hours. And she's so small, she'll probably need to eat more frequently than that. Jack's face fell, the brief moment of hope collapsing back into despair. I have to get back to the ranch. I've got livestock, fences down, 1,000 things that can't wait. I was going to head back today, try to find someone, anyone who would help. But there's no one within 50 miles who'd be willing. I've already tried. Silence stretched between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to voice. Finally, Grace spoke the truth they had both been avoiding. She'll die if she doesn't eat regularly. If you take her back to the ranch without... She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't speak the outcome into existence. I know, Jack's voice was hollow, empty. I know, but what choice do I have? I can't stay in town. I've got responsibilities. And I can't ask you to. I mean, you've already done more than I had any right to expect. You've given us this chance. I can't ask more. You're not asking, Grace said softly. I'm offering. Jack's head snapped up. What? Bring me to the ranch. Bring me with you. Let me help Lily until she's strong enough to manage without. Let me do this one thing right. Grace, Jack's use of her name felt shockingly intimate, as if speaking it aloud created connection deeper than circumstance. Do you understand what you're saying? The gossip alone would destroy what little standing you have left in this town. And Mrs. Griswold, she'll never let you back if you leave with me. You'll lose your room, your livelihood, everything. What livelihood? Grace's laugh held no humor. Only truth worn smooth by repetition. Selling bread to people who can't stand to look at me. Living in a room that costs me everything I earn. Existing in a town that's made it clear I'm only tolerated, never welcomed. That's not a life worth protecting. But if this doesn't work, Jack pressed, if Lily doesn't make it anyway, you'll have given up everything for nothing. Grace met his eyes directly, held his gaze with the weight of 2 years' worth of accumulated grief and hard-won understanding. And if I don't try, I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I let another baby die because I was too afraid to risk my own comfort. I can't do that again, Jack. I can't carry that weight twice. Lily chose that moment to wake, her mouth immediately searching for Grace's breast again. Instinct overriding everything else. Grace adjusted her dress, helped her latch, watched her drink with the same desperate intensity as before. How long would you need? Jack asked quietly. How long before we'd know if she can survive? A month, maybe. Grace tried to calculate based on knowledge she had gathered from other women, from conversations she had been excluded from, but had overheard. Long enough to get her weight up. Make sure she can tolerate milk. See if she can thrive. After that, you could probably transition her to cow's milk mixed with other things. There are formulas, ways to make it work. A month. Jack processed this, his expression cycling through hope, fear, calculation. I can manage a month, I can hire someone to help with the heavy work, or let things slide that can wait. But Grace, are you sure? Are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Grace thought about the market square, about her corner table, about 2 years of careful invisibility. She thought about Mrs. Griswold's narrow face, about the boarding house room that had become both shelter and prison. She thought about the loaves of bread Pete would bake and sell to people who would never invite her to their tables. Then she looked at Lily, at the baby whose eyes had opened and were fixed on her face with absolute trust, at the tiny life that had brought her body back from the dead, that had proven 2 years of judgment wrong in the space of 20 minutes. I'm certain. Jack nodded slowly, his jaw tightening with emotion he was working hard to control. Then we'll go tomorrow morning, first light. I'll pay Mrs. Griswold whatever she demands for your lost rent. I'll hire a wagon to get us back to the ranch. And I'll pay you whatever you think is fair for... No, Grace's interruption was gentle but firm. This isn't about money. You have to eat. You have to have something when this is over. Then pay me room and board, nothing more. Grace shifted Lily to her shoulder, gently patting her back until a tiny burp emerged. I'm not doing this as hired help. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do, because Lily deserves a chance, because I can give her one. Jack stood, his movements slow, almost reverent. He reached out, his calloused hand hovering near Lily's head, then settling gently on her wispy hair. Thank you, he whispered. I don't have better words. I don't know how to express. Thank you. Grace nodded, not trusting her voice. They stayed like that for another hour, Grace feeding Lily twice more. Jack sitting on the floor beside the bed, both of them silent except for the occasional murmured observation. Outside, the sun began its descent, painting the alley in amber light. In the boarding house, footsteps and voices created the soundtrack of other people's lives continuing. When Mrs. Griswold's sharp knock finally came at the door, Grace was ready. Time's up, the landlady called, unless you've got another $5. Grace cradled Lily, who had fallen into deep sleep, warm and milk-drunk against her chest. She buttoned her dress carefully, then looked at Jack. Tomorrow morning, first light. First light, he confirmed, taking Lily gently into his arms. The baby barely stirred, content in a way she hadn't been when he first carried her into the market square. At the door, Jack paused. Whatever happens next, Grace, whatever people say or do, you should know this. You saved her life today. You gave us both a future we didn't have 6 hours ago. That matters. That will always matter, regardless of what comes after. Grace watched him descend the stairs, Lily secure in his arms, moving with the careful determination of a man carrying something infinitely precious. Mrs. Griswold stood at the bottom, her expression sour but silent. She had been paid, and that was all that mattered to her narrow heart. When the front door closed behind them, Grace returned to her room, sat on the bed that still held the warmth of where they had been. Her body felt strange, alert, alive, purposeful in ways she had forgotten were possible. Her breasts ached with fullness, with the knowledge that they had successfully fed a starving infant, that they had proven themselves capable after 2 years of being branded as failures. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the alley where shadows were lengthening, where the world continued its indifferent turning. Tomorrow she would pack everything she owned into a single trunk. Tomorrow she would walk out of this boarding house and this town without looking back. Tomorrow she would begin a journey that might end in failure, or might end in something she didn't yet have words to name. But tonight Grace Bennett sat in her small room and felt something she hadn't felt since the day she buried her son. Hope. The judge paused in his telling, relit his pipe with steady hands that showed no tremor despite 9 decades of living. Thomas sat forward in his chair, completely absorbed, the black eye and scraped knuckles forgotten in the weight of his great-grandmother's story. So she just left, Thomas asked. Just walked away from everything. Not walked, son. She chose. There's a difference. Judge Carlyle drew on his pipe. Walking away is retreat. Choosing is battle. And what your great-grandmother did that next morning was declare war on every person who had told her she didn't matter. He settled back into his chair, the leather creaking with familiar comfort. The first pale light of dawn found Grace already awake, sitting on the edge of her bed with her trunk open before her. She'd spent the night in restless half-sleep, her body responding to phantom cries, her breast letting down milk for a baby who wasn't there. The sensation was both foreign and achingly familiar, as if her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. September 1872, Millridge, Wyoming Territory. Dawn. Grace packed methodically, folding each item with care, despite knowing most wouldn't survive the journey in pristine condition. Her 3 dresses, the calico she had worn yesterday, a dark wool for winter, a faded cotton she used for baking, her spare apron, her nightgown, the quilt from her bed, the ribbon she had hidden in her drawer still never worn, her mixing bowl and wooden spoon, the sourdough starter sealed carefully in its jar, wrapped in cloth to prevent breaking, a hairbrush with missing bristles, the small Bible that had been her mother's though Grace hadn't opened it in years. At the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in her wedding dress that she couldn't bear to sell or wear, was the tiny gown she had sewn for her son, the only thing of his that remained. She left the gown where it was, buried beneath fabric and memory. By the time the boarding house began to stir with morning sounds, Grace had washed, dressed in her sturdiest clothes, and braided her hair with fingers that barely trembled. She stood at the window watching the sky lighten from black to deep blue to the particular shade of gray that promised a clear autumn day. Hoofbeats on the street below brought her to attention. Through the window she saw Jack Morgan pulling a wagon to a stop in front of the boarding house. The wagon was rough but sturdy, its bed filled with hay to cushion the journey. Lily lay in a wooden box that had been padded with blankets, creating a makeshift bassinet secured to prevent sliding. Grace picked up her trunk, lighter than it should be for a life's possessions, and headed downstairs before Mrs. Griswold could emerge to complicate the departure with demands for additional payment. But the landlady was already waiting, arms crossed, expression calculating. "Leaving without notice, Grace, that's a breach of our agreement. I'll need 2 weeks' rent to cover the inconvenience." "Our agreement was week to week," Grace said quietly. "I paid through yesterday. The agreement was also that you'd maintain the respectability of my establishment." Mrs. Griswold's voice carried the sharp edge of moral superiority. "Running off with a man in the middle of the night?" "It's dawn," Grace interrupted, her voice still quiet but carrying an edge it never had before. "And I'm not running off with anyone. I'm accepting employment as a wet nurse for an infant who would otherwise die. Unless you're suggesting I should let a baby starve to preserve your establishment's reputation." Mrs. Griswold's mouth thinned into a razor line. "That baby's father is a desperate man trying to save his daughter's life." Grace shifted the trunk's weight in her arms. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a wagon waiting." She moved past the landlady without waiting for permission. Down the narrow stairs, through the front door that had marked the boundary of her small world for 2 years. The morning air hit her face, cool and sharp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and dust and possibility. Jack was waiting beside the wagon, his hat in his hands, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. He had clearly been awake all night as well. His eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw shadowed with 2 days' growth of beard. But when he saw Grace emerge, something in his expression lightened. "You came," he said, as if he had genuinely doubted she would. "I said I would." Grace moved to the wagon, peering into the box where Lily slept. The baby's color was better than yesterday, her breathing deeper. She had survived the night, which felt like its own small miracle. Jack took Grace's trunk, lifting it easily into the wagon bed. She woke twice, cried for about 20 minutes each time. "I tried the sugar water again, but she wouldn't take it. I thought," his voice caught, "I thought maybe yesterday was a fluke, that maybe it wouldn't work again, that I'd made you give up everything for nothing." "But you came anyway," Grace observed. "I had to try." He secured the trunk with rope. Even if there was only a chance, I had to give her that chance. Grace climbed into the wagon seat, settling her skirts around her. Jack swung up beside her, taking the reins with the practiced ease of someone who had spent his life working with horses. The wagon lurched forward, wheels creaking, and Grace felt the last thread connecting her to Millridge stretch and then snap cleanly. They rode in silence through the awakening town. A few early risers saw them pass. Old Mr. Henderson opening his shop, the baker's apprentice carrying wood for the ovens, Martha Sullivan emptying a wash basin from her porch. Each face registered recognition, then shock, then the kind of knowing disapproval that would fuel gossip for weeks. Grace kept her eyes forward. Let them talk. Let them spin whatever stories made them feel superior. She was beyond their judgment now, beyond the careful dance of trying to earn back respect she would never be granted. The freedom of it was dizzying. They cleared the last buildings of Millridge and headed into open country. The road to Jack's ranch cut through rolling grassland dotted with pine and aspen, climbing gradually into foothills that would eventually meet the true mountains. The morning sun broke over the eastern horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and rose gold. Lily woke as the wagon hit a particularly rough patch of road, her cries immediate and insistent. Grace reached back, lifting her from the bassinet with care. Even after just one day, the weight of her felt familiar in Grace's arms, the shape of her body already memorized. "Can you manage while I'm driving?" Jack asked, keeping his eyes on the road but his voice tight with concern. "I've done harder things," Grace said, though in truth she wasn't certain. She settled Lily against her chest, managing to unbutton her dress one-handed while the wagon jostled over ruts and stones. The baby latched immediately, drinking with the same desperate focus as yesterday. Jack glanced over, and Grace saw relief flood his features. "Every time she feeds, I think it might be the last time it works, that your body might decide it's done." "Bodies are strange," Grace said, watching Lily's tiny hand knead against her breast. "They remember things we'd rather forget. They hold on to purposes we thought we'd lost." She paused, feeling the pull of Lily's suckling, the strange comfort of being needed in such an elemental way. "Mine apparently remembered how to do this even after 2 years of pretending it had forgotten." "How did you survive it?" The question was quiet, almost hesitant. "Losing your baby, your husband. How did you keep going?" Grace considered lying, offering some platitude about strength or faith or the passage of time. But Jack had been honest with her about Catherine, about his own grief, and he deserved the same honesty in return. "I didn't keep going, not really. I just kept breathing, baking, existing. I stopped being a person and became a function. Someone who produced bread, who occupied space, who survived without living. I thought that was all I deserved, all I was capable of. But you don't think that anymore." "I don't know what I think anymore." Grace looked down at Lily, whose eyes had drifted closed again, milk-drunk and content. "Yesterday morning I knew exactly who I was and what my life would be. Today I'm riding in a wagon toward a place I've never seen to help a man I barely know. Caring for a baby who isn't mine. Everything I thought was certain has become uncertain. It's terrifying." She stopped, surprised by her own words, "and it's the most alive I've felt since Robert died." Jack nodded slowly, his hands steady on the reins. "Catherine used to say that grief doesn't actually kill you even when you wish it would. It just changes the shape of your life into something you don't recognize. She'd lost her parents young, her brother to fever. She understood about becoming a different person than you'd planned to be. You loved her very much." "I did." The admission came without hesitation. "I still do. I always will. But I'm learning that love doesn't stop when someone dies. It just becomes something you carry instead of something you share. Catherine wanted Lily to live. She fought so hard to give her that chance. Honoring that. Keeping Lily alive. That's how I love Catherine now." They rode in comfortable silence after that, the wagon following the climbing road as the sun rose higher. The landscape shifted around them, grassland giving way to forest, the air growing cooler and thinner, the distant mountains becoming closer and more defined. Grace fed Lily twice more during the journey, each time marveling at her own body's capacity to provide, at the way this tiny life depended entirely on what Grace could offer. It was late morning when Jack guided the wagon off the main road onto a narrow track that wound through dense pine forest. Almost there, he said, and Grace heard both anticipation and apprehension in his voice. The trees opened suddenly onto a valley that took Grace's breath away. A wide meadow autumn gold stretched toward mountains that rose like cathedral walls. A creek cut through the center, catching sunlight like scattered diamonds. And at the valley's heart sat a cabin, not large but solidly built from pine logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. But the valley's beauty couldn't hide the evidence of struggle. Fences sagged or lay broken in several places. The barn door hung crooked on its hinges. Weeds had overtaken what looked like it had once been a kitchen garden. Scattered tools, a wagon wheel, various items that should have been stored away. All spoke of a household that had stopped functioning. Jack saw her taking it in. His jaw tightened. I know it's rough. I've been trying to keep up with the essential work. Feeding livestock, basic repairs. But there's only so much one man can do when he's also trying to keep an infant alive on sugar water and prayer. It's beautiful, Grace said, and meant it. The disrepair was superficial, fixable. The land itself was magnificent, rich soil, good water, shelter from the worst winds. How long have you been here? 3 years. Catherine and I bought it from a trapper who wanted to move further west. We spent 2 years making it livable, building the barn, clearing land for crops. We were going to run cattle, maybe sheep. We had plans for... His voice roughened. We had a lot of plans. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the cabin. 2 horses nickered from a corral beside the barn, and Grace could hear chickens clucking somewhere out of sight. Signs of life, even amid the chaos of loss. Jack climbed down and came around to help Grace from the wagon seat. His hands at her waist were careful, respectful, lifting her as if she weighed nothing despite her size. The ground felt unsteady under her feet after hours of wagon motion. Let me show you inside, Jack said, reaching back to lift Lily's bassinet. It's not much, but... Stop apologizing, Grace said gently. You're doing the best you can under impossible circumstances. No one expects perfection from a man trying to survive grief and raise an infant alone. The cabin's interior was dim and cool, sunlight filtering through windows that desperately needed washing. The main room served as kitchen and living space. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. A rough-hewn table and chairs sat in the center. A cook stove stood near the far wall with a pile of unwashed dishes beside it. Shelves held supplies, though they looked poorly organized and half-empty. A rocking chair sat near the fireplace. A woman's shawl still draped over its back. 2 doors led to what Grace assumed were bedrooms. Jack moved to the nearest one, pushing it open to reveal a small room with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the meadow. This was going to be the nursery. I've been sleeping in here with Lily in case something happened during the night. Grace stepped into the room, setting her carpet bag on the dresser. The space was spare but clean, the bed made with military precision. The floor swept. Whatever chaos ruled the rest of the house, Jack had kept this room, Lily's room, in order. Where will you sleep? She asked. The other bedroom. It's larger, but I haven't... He stopped, swallowed. That was the room Catherine and I shared. I haven't been able to go back in there. Not yet. Understanding passed between them without need for further explanation. Grace nodded. Then you'll stay there and I'll stay here with Lily. That way I can feed her when she wakes without disturbing you. You need actual sleep, Jack. You're running on fumes. I can't ask you to take night duty. You need rest too. I'm waking anyway, Grace said truthfully. Her body was already attuned to Lily's schedule, her breasts waking her before the baby's cries even started. Let me do this. Let me help in the way that makes sense. Jack looked like he wanted to argue but was too exhausted to manage it. All right, but if it becomes too much, you tell me. Deal. Lily chose that moment to wake, her cries starting soft and building to insistent demand. Grace lifted her from the bassinet, settling into the rocking chair that must have been Catherine's. The shawl still smelled faintly of lavender and some other scent Grace couldn't identify. The ghost of a woman who had rocked in this chair while pregnant, dreaming of the child she would soon hold. Grace fed Lily while Jack unloaded the wagon, his boots heavy on the porch, his movements visible through the window. She watched him work with the kind of tired determination that spoke of months of forcing himself to keep going. When he came back inside, she was burping Lily against her shoulder. I'll get you something to eat, Jack said, moving to the stove. It won't be fancy. I'm not much of a cook. I can cook, Grace offered. Once Lily is settled, I can... You're here to care for her, not to be my housekeeper. I'm here to help keep this household running so Lily has a chance to survive, Grace corrected. That means feeding her, yes, but it also means making sure you are eating properly, that the house doesn't fall apart around us, that we're all taking care of each other. You can't care for Lily if you're collapsing from exhaustion and malnutrition. Jack stared at her, something complicated moving across his face. When you put it that way... Besides, Grace added, settling Lily back in her bassinet as the baby drifted into sleep. I like cooking. It gives me something to do with my hands, something productive. She moved to the stove, surveying the available supplies with a practiced eye. Flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, a few sorry-looking potatoes, coffee that smelled stale, the larder of a man too busy surviving to think about proper meals. When was the last time you ate something that wasn't beans or hardtack? She asked. Jack had to think about it. I honestly don't remember. Then today you're getting real food. Go tend your animals. I'll call you when it's ready. For a moment she thought he might argue, but then he simply nodded, grabbed his hat, and headed outside. Through the window, Grace watched him walk to the barn with the gait of a man carrying weight that went beyond the physical. She worked efficiently, building a fire in the stove, mixing cornbread batter, setting beans to soak for tomorrow, frying salt pork until the cabin filled with savory smoke. The motions were meditative, familiar, grounding her in this strange new reality. Lily woke twice more while Grace cooked, each feeding becoming smoother, more natural. Grace found herself talking to the baby as she ate, her voice soft and continuous. Your papa is a good man, little Lily. He's tired and saying, and carrying more than anyone should have to carry, but he's good. He loves you so much. Fought for you when the whole world said you weren't worth fighting for. She stroked Lily's downy hair. Your mama must have been something special too, to have a man love her this much even after she's gone. I hope you grow up to be like her. Strong, brave, worth fighting for. The door opened and Jack stepped inside, bringing the scent of hay and horses. He stopped when he saw the table. Cornbread, fried pork, coffee, the simple meal arranged like it mattered. When did you... He gestured helplessly at the food. You were gone for an hour, Grace said, setting Lily back in her bassinet. Sit, eat while it's hot. They sat across from each other at the rough table, and for several minutes the only sound was eating. Jack consumed his food with the focused intensity of someone who had been running on empty for too long. This is good, Jack said finally, pushing his empty plate back. Really good. I'd forgotten food could taste like something other than obligation. It's just cornbread and pork. It's the first real meal I've had since Catherine. He stopped, cleared his throat. Thank you. Grace began clearing the table, stacking dishes beside the wash basin. Tomorrow I'll inventory what you have and make a list of what we need. If you're going into town... I'm not going into town, Jack said flatly. I'm not setting foot in Millridge again if I can help it. Then we'll need to find another option. There must be a trading post, another town, somewhere you can get supplies without... Pine Ridge. It's about 15 miles south, small settlement, but they have a general store. The trader there doesn't ask questions, doesn't judge. I can go there. All right. Grace filed this information away. Then we'll make it work. The afternoon passed in the kind of domestic routine that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. Grace washed dishes while Jack repaired the barn door. She fed Lily while he checked fence lines. She started bread dough rising while he brought in firewood. They moved around each other with the careful courtesy of strangers sharing space, each conscious of boundaries not yet established. As evening approached, Jack came inside to find Grace kneading bread at the table, Lily asleep in her bassinet nearby. He stood in the doorway watching, and Grace felt the weight of his gaze. What? She asked without stopping her work. It's just seeing someone else in this house, hearing sounds that aren't me or Lily. It's strange. He paused. Good strange, but strange. Grace shaped the dough into loaves, set them in pans to rise. I imagine everything feels strange right now. Your whole life turned upside down in a matter of weeks. It did. Jack moved to the rocking chair, sinking into it with a groan of exhausted muscles. But this, having you here, having help, not being alone with it all, that's the first thing that's felt right since Catherine died. The honesty in his voice made Grace pause. She wiped flour from her hands, turned to face him. We should talk about expectations, about how this arrangement works. All right, I'm here to care for Lily until she's strong enough to manage without me. That's the primary purpose. Everything else, cooking, cleaning, helping with the household, that's secondary. If at any point you feel uncomfortable with the arrangement, or if the gossip becomes too much, or if— Grace, Jack's interruption was gentle. I don't care about gossip. I don't care what people in Millridge think or say. The only thing I care about is keeping Lily alive. If having you here accomplishes that, then this arrangement is worth whatever judgment comes with it. And when she doesn't need me anymore. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to examine. When a month has passed and she's thriving and I've served my purpose, I don't know, Jack said finally. I guess we'll figure it out when we get there. But Grace, even when Lily doesn't need you anymore, that doesn't mean— He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. You'll always have a place here. Always. Regardless of what happens with Lily, I want you to know that. Grace felt something shift in her chest, some careful guard she had maintained beginning to crack. Why you don't owe me anything? This was my choice, Bon. Because you gave up everything to help a stranger's child. Because you showed mercy when the whole world showed cruelty. Because— Jack's voice roughened. Because kindness is rare out here, Grace. Real kindness. The kind that costs something. And when you find it, you don't let it go. The 12th day at the ranch dawned clear and cold. Jack rose before sunrise to check the trap lines 5 miles into the high country. A day's work at least. Maybe 2 if the game had been good. He left Grace with the rifle, extra ammunition, instructions to fire 3 shots if there was trouble. She watched him ride out on his chestnut gelding, disappearing into the pine forest as the sun broke over the eastern peaks. Then she turned back to the cabin, to Lily, to the morning routine that had become familiar in less than 2 weeks. Feed the baby, wash dishes, start bread, hang laundry on the line Jack had strung between 2 pines. Simple tasks, but satisfying in their way. Evidence of life continuing. She was hanging the last of Jack's shirts when she heard it. A sound that made every hair on her body stand straight, low, rumbling, coming from the direction of the barn. Grace froze, shirt still clutched in her hands, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. She knew that sound. Every person who lived on the frontier knew that sound. Bear. She turned slowly, moving with the careful precision of prey, trying not to attract predator attention, and saw it. A grizzly, massive, 700 pounds at least, standing at the barn entrance, its nose lifted, testing the air. It had smelled something. The smoked meat hanging in the barn probably, or the horses, or fresh blood from the chicken Jack had butchered 2 days ago. The bear dropped to all fours, moved toward the barn with the deceptive speed of something that large. Grace's mind raced through options. All of them bad. She could run for the cabin, lock herself inside with Lily, hope the bear lost interest. But the horses were in the barn, vulnerable, and without the horses they were stranded. 20 miles from the nearest settlement. She could fire the rifle, try to scare it off. But bears were unpredictable, especially grizzlies. A warning shot might drive it away, or might trigger a charge. The bear reached the barn, began pawing at the door Jack had repaired just yesterday. The horses inside screamed, high-pitched sounds of terror that cut through the morning like knives. Grace made her decision. She dropped the shirt, ran for the cabin, grabbed the rifle from where Jack had left it loaded by the door, checked the chamber with shaking hands. 1 shot. She had 1 shot before needing to reload, and reloading took time she might not have. She stepped onto the porch, raised the rifle to her shoulder, the way Jack had shown her during their first week. Brace against recoil, breathe out, Squeeze, don't pull. The bear had gotten the barn door partially open, was squeezing through. One of the horses kicked at its stall, wood splintering. Grace aimed high, over the bear's head, and fired. The crack of the rifle split the morning silence. Birds exploded from nearby trees. The horses screamed louder, and the bear turned, looked directly at Grace. For one eternal moment, they stared at each other across 30 yards of meadow, woman and bear, each measuring the other. Grace's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the rifle. Her breath came in short gasps. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to make herself small. But she held her ground. The bear took one step toward her, then another. Sting. Deciding if this loud, annoying creature was worth the effort of killing. Grace fumbled for another cartridge, her fingers clumsy with fear. The bear was 20 yards away now, close enough that she could see its eyes, black and intelligent, could see the silver tips of its fur, could smell it, the wild musky scent of predator. She got the cartridge loaded, raised the rifle again, knowing that if this bear charged, one shot wouldn't be enough, wouldn't even slow it down. But she had to try. Get back. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. Go on, get. The bear paused, seemed to consider. Then, miracle of miracles, it turned, ambled back toward the tree line with the unhurried gait of something that feared nothing. It paused at the edge of the forest, looked back once, as if filing Grace's scent away for future reference, then disappeared into the shadows. Grace stood on the porch for a full minute after it vanished, rifle still raised, body shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Then her knees gave out. She sat down hard on the porch steps, rifle across her lap, and shook. When Jack returned 3 hours later, he found her still sitting there, Lily in her arms, the baby fed in content, but Grace unable to move, unable to process what had happened. Grace, he swung down from his horse, concern immediate and sharp. What happened? Are you hurt? She told him, voice flat, still processing. About the bear, the barn, the warning shot, the eternal moment of standing her ground while something that could kill her with one swipe decided whether she was worth the effort. Jack knelt in front of her, his hands on her shoulders. You did good. Most people would have run, would have hidden, but you protected the horses, protected the ranch. You did exactly right. I was terrified. Being terrified and doing it anyway is the definition of courage. He stood, offered his hand. Come on, let me check the barn. Make sure he didn't damage anything. And then I'm teaching you how to reload faster. That evening as they sat at dinner, Jack looked at her across the table. You're stronger than you know, Grace. Stronger than most men I've met. And for the first time since Robert died, Grace believed it might be true. The delegation arrived on the 23rd day. Grace was in the garden, such as it was trying to coax some late-season vegetables from soil that hadn't been tended in months. Lily slept in a basket in the shade of the porch. Jack was out checking fence lines. The autumn sun warm on Grace's back as she pulled weeds and turned earth. She heard the wagons before she saw them, 3 of them, coming up the track from the main road, moving with a deliberate pace of people who had come a long way and meant to be heard. Grace stood, wiped dirt from her hands, felt her stomach drop as the wagons came into view. Leading them was a woman Grace recognized even from a distance, Mrs. Harriet Blackwell, 55 years old and sharp as a knife, the self-appointed moral guardian of Millridge, flanked by her 2 sons, both over 6 feet, both built like the farm work they'd grown up doing, both with faces that suggested they weren't accustomed to hearing the word no. Behind them came more familiar faces from Millridge. Reverend Sterling, Nathan Harper, Thomas Green the banker. Others Grace recognized but couldn't name. They pulled to a stop in front of the cabin. Mrs. Blackwell climbed down from her wagon with the rigid dignity of someone used to being obeyed. Her sons followed, flanking her like guards. Grace moved toward them, not to greet, to intercept, to keep them away from Lily. Every maternal instinct that had awakened in the past 3 weeks suddenly screaming danger. Mrs. Bennett, Mrs. Blackwell's voice carried across the yard, cold and clear. Or should I say Mrs. Morgan, though I understand the legality of that title is somewhat questionable. We're not married, Grace said evenly. I'm employed as wet nurse, room and board, nothing more. How convenient. Mrs. Blackwell's smile was all teeth, no warmth. And yet you live together, lone in this isolated valley, with no chaperone, no witnesses to the propriety of your arrangement. The propriety of my arrangement is keeping a child alive. So you claim. Mrs. Blackwell's elder son Marcus stepped forward. But we've heard different stories. Stories about impropriety, about moral corruption, about a child being raised in an environment unfit for Christian upbringing. Grace felt rage building beneath her fear. You let this child nearly die in a market square, every single one of you. So forgive me if I don't value your opinion on proper upbringing. Your impertinence proves our point exactly. Mrs. Blackwell's voice hardened, became the voice that had cowed congregations and bullied charity drives into compliance. No decent woman would speak to her betters in such a manner. My betters. Grace took a step forward. You stood in that square and laughed while a baby died. What exactly makes you better than me? Jack appeared from behind the barn, moving fast, his hand on the rifle slung across his back. What's going on here? Mr. Morgan, Mrs. Blackwell turned her attention to him. We've come on behalf of concerned citizens from Millridge, and on behalf of the child whose welfare you've placed at risk through your irresponsible choices. Lily is fine. She's healthy. She's gaining weight. She's living in sin. Reverend Sterling stepped forward, his voice carrying practiced authority. A child should be raised in a proper Christian household, with married parents, with moral guidance, not in this situation. Then marry us. Jack's words fell into stunned silence. If that's what it takes, if that's the only problem, then I'll marry Grace right now. Judge Carlisle is in Pine Ridge. We can ride there tomorrow. Mrs. Blackwell smiled, and Grace felt her blood run cold. I'm afraid it's too late for that, Mr. Morgan. You see, we've already filed a petition with Judge Carlisle, requesting an emergency custody hearing. She produced a document from her bag, official looking, sealed with wax. We have testimony from multiple witnesses about your unsuitability as a parent, about Mrs. Bennett's history, about the suspicious circumstances of her husband's death, about her failure to keep her own child alive. Grace felt the words hit like physical blows. We've also located a family in Pine Ridge, Mrs. Blackwell continued. Good Christian people, willing to take custody of your daughter, to raise her in an environment free from moral corruption and improper influence. You can't do this. But Grace heard the desperation creeping into Jack's voice, heard the fear. You can't just take a man's child. The law disagrees. Mrs. Blackwell's smile widened. Judge Carlisle has scheduled a hearing for 2 weeks from today, at which time he'll determine whether your current situation serves your daughter's best interests. We fully expect him to grant us custody. She climbed back into her wagon, her sons following. I suggest you prepare your arguments, Mr. Morgan, and perhaps consider whether fighting this is truly in your daughter's best interests. After all, continued resistance might only prove our point about your judgment. The wagons turned, began the long trip back down the valley, and Grace watched them go with the certain knowledge that the real war had just begun. Jack stood frozen, his face pale beneath his tan. They'll take her. They'll find some judge, some law, some way to take her from me. Not if we're married. Grace's mind raced through possibilities. If we eliminate their ammunition, make the situation respectable, they have no case. A marriage of convenience won't fool anyone. It doesn't have to fool anyone. It just has to be legal, binding, legitimate. Grace turned to face him fully. We get married, present ourselves to Judge Carlisle as a proper family, show him Lily thriving, show him a functional household. What grounds would he have to remove her? Jack stared at her. Grace, you're talking about binding yourself to me, legally, for appearances, for strategy. That's not fair to you. Fair, Grace laughed, the sound harsh. Nothing about this is fair, but Lily deserves a chance, and this gives her one. What about when she doesn't need you anymore? When you're trapped in a marriage you entered for tactical reasons? Then we figure it out. Grace surprised herself with her certainty. But right now, marriage is the weapon that keeps Mrs. Blackwell from winning, so we use it. Judge Carlisle arrived at the ranch 2 days later, riding alongside John and Mary Henderson from Pine Ridge Trading Post, willing to serve as witnesses, willing to ride 15 miles on a cold November day because Jack Morgan had once helped John repair his roof without asking payment. The ceremony took place in the cabin's main room. Simple, sparse, but legal. Grace wore her dark wool dress, the best she owned. Jack had shaved, put on his cleanest shirt, still smelled of leather and horses in the wild, but trying, making effort. Lily slept in her cradle, the pine wood Jack had carved and sanded smooth, oblivious to the adults rearranging their lives around her continued existence. Judge Carlisle spoke about the seriousness of marriage, about commitment and responsibility. His eyes sharp, missing nothing, taking measure of both of them, deciding if this was genuine or theater. Jack Morgan, do you take Grace Bennett to be your lawfully wedded wife to have and to hold from this day forward? I do. Jack's voice steady, his eyes on Grace. Serious, honest. Grace Bennett, do you take Jack Morgan to be your lawfully wedded husband to have and to hold from this day forward? Grace looked at Jack, at this mountain man who had fought for his daughter when the world said she wasn't worth saving, at the man who had trusted her with what mattered most, at the partnership they were building from necessity but might become something more. I do. Then by the authority vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife. No kiss, no rings, no celebration, just the scratch of the judge's pen filling out the marriage certificate, the Hendersons' signatures as witnesses, the legal transformation of three separate people into something that resembled a family. After the judge and Hendersons departed, Grace and Jack stood in the cabin that was now legally as much hers as his. Well, Jack said finally, I suppose that's done. I suppose it is. They looked at each other across the space that separated them. Husband and wife, strangers and partners, two people who had made an impossible choice and would now have to live with its consequences. That night, Grace moved her belongings into the master bedroom, the room Jack and Catherine had shared, confronting ghosts with every item she unpacked. Catherine's brush still on the dresser, her boots by the door, her shawl hanging on a peg. Grace gathered them carefully, spoke to the absent woman as she worked. I'm not trying to replace you, I'm just trying to help, to give Lily the chance you died giving her. She packed Catherine's belongings in a trunk, carried it to the barn loft, not erasing, just making space for what came next. 2 weeks later, they rode into Pine Ridge. Lily bundled against the November cold. The journey took 6 hours. 6 hours of Grace's stomach churning with dread. 6 hours of Jack's jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping. The trading post had been cleared for the hearing. Rough chairs arranged in rows. A table set up front for Judge Carlisle, and already filling with people from Millridge who had made the journey to witness justice, or what they believed was justice. Mrs. Blackwell sat in the front row, flanked by her sons and the town's most influential citizens, all of them watching Grace with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. Judge Carlisle banged his gavel, called the proceeding to order, and the battle began. Mrs. Blackwell's testimony came first, painting a picture of impropriety and moral corruption, of Grace's dead son and suspicious husband, of Jack's isolated lifestyle and Catherine's tragic death, of a baby being used as pawn in an inappropriate relationship. They married only after we filed our petition, she said, her voice carrying righteous conviction. Clearly an attempt to circumvent proper oversight. The rushed nature of their union only proves our concerns about judgment and propriety. Thomas Green testified next, elaborating on Robert Bennett's death, implying without quite stating that Grace had driven him to it, that her failures as a wife and mother had sent a good man to his grave. Grace sat through it all with her hands clenched in her lap, Lily sleeping peacefully against her chest, Jack's jaw growing tighter with each accusation. Then Emma Harper took the stand, and Grace felt hope flicker to life. Emma described the day in the market square, how Jack had begged for help, how everyone had refused, how Grace had been the only person brave enough to step forward. She saved that baby's life, Emma said clearly. Lily was dying. Everyone could see it. But no one would help. We were all more concerned with propriety than with a child's survival. Mrs. Morgan was the only one with courage. Mrs. Blackwell's lawyer attacked immediately. You're testifying against your own community, against your husband's wishes. Why should we believe you're being truthful? Because I have to live with myself, Emma said quietly. And I can't live with myself if I stay silent and let you destroy someone for doing what I was too afraid to do. Then it was Grace's turn. She stood, handed Lily to Jack, and walked to the front of the room. Every eye in the trading post fixed on her, measuring, judging, deciding her worth. Judge Carlisle studied her for a long moment before speaking. Mrs. Morgan, I've heard considerable testimony about your unsuitability for motherhood, about your history of loss, your isolation, your questionable character. I'd like to hear your response. In your own words. Grace took a breath, steadying herself. Then she told the truth, all of it. Her son's premature birth, the undeveloped lungs that no amount of love could fix, Robert's inability to forgive what neither of them could have prevented, his walk into the mountains that everyone called accident, but Grace knew was choice. The town needed someone to punish, she said, her voice gaining strength. I was convenient, different enough to make uncomfortable, damaged enough to seem deserving. So they decided I was cursed, inadequate, unworthy. And I believed them. For 2 years, I believed exactly what they told me about myself. She looked directly at Mrs. Blackwell. But then Lily needed help. And suddenly my adequacy didn't matter. Suddenly my body wasn't wrong. It was necessary. Suddenly I had value. But only as a tool, only as long as I stayed quiet and grateful and invisible. Grace turned back to Judge Carlisle. You want to know if I'm fit to be Lily's mother? Look at her. She gestured to where Jack held the sleeping baby. She's healthy, thriving, loved. She's fed every few hours from my own body, held and cared for and cherished. I may not have given birth to her, but I've given her life in every way that matters. Lily chose that moment to wake, her cries filling the room, demanding, insistent. Grace met the judge's eyes. Your Honor, may I feed my daughter? The room went silent, shocked. This wasn't done. This was... Here, Judge Carlisle asked. Now, she's hungry. I won't let propriety starve my child. For a long moment, Judge Carlisle simply looked at her. Then he nodded. Proceed. Grace took Lily from Jack, settled into a chair, and nursed her daughter right there in the trading post, in front of the judge and Mrs. Blackwell, and everyone who had come to witness her judgment. The ultimate defiance, the ultimate proof. When Lily latched and began drinking, Grace felt the tension in the room shift, saw faces changing, saw the reality of a mother feeding her child overriding every abstract argument about propriety and fitness. Judge Carlisle watched for a full minute, then spoke. The petition is denied. Mrs. Blackwell shot to her feet. Your Honor, you can't simply... I can and I have. Judge Carlisle's voice carried absolute authority. I see a healthy infant well cared for by parents who clearly love her. I see a legal marriage between two people committed to this child's welfare. Most importantly, I see a woman who acted when everyone else, including you, Mrs. Blackwell, chose cowardice over compassion. He stood, gathering his papers. Mrs. Morgan's history of loss is tragic, not criminal. Her isolation in Millridge speaks more to that community's cruelty than to her character. And her willingness to risk everything to save a stranger's child demonstrates exactly the kind of moral fiber we should hope to see in parents. He turned to Mrs. Blackwell. Your petition appears motivated by vengeance, not protection. I will not allow this court to become an instrument of your personal crusade. The matter is closed. The gavel came down. Final. Absolute. They had won. Grace sat holding Lily, hardly daring to believe it. Jack's hand found her shoulder, gripping tight. Emma Harper was crying openly. The Hendersons smiled from the back of the room, and Mrs. Blackwell stood frozen, defeated. Her face flushed dark with rage and humiliation. As the crowd began to file out, Mrs. Blackwell pushed her way to where Grace and Jack stood. This isn't over, she hissed. low enough that only they could hear. You think you've won? I have connections, resources. I'll make sure everyone knows what you are. A whore and a failure. I'll destroy you both. Jack stepped forward, his body a wall between Grace and Mrs. Blackwell. Say another word and I'll... But Grace stopped him, placed her hand on his arm. No, let her talk. Words can't hurt us anymore. She met Mrs. Blackwell's eyes directly. You'll fail again, Mrs. Blackwell said, her voice shaking with fury. That baby will die, and everyone will know I was right. Then I'll live with that, Grace said calmly. But I'll have tried, which is more than you can say. Mrs. Blackwell turned and stormed out, her sons following, the last of her dignity in tatters. Grace and Jack stood in the empty trading post, Lily fed in content between them. The afternoon light slanting through dusty windows. They had declared war and won the first battle. But both knew the war itself was far from over. Judge Carlyle paused again, refilled his pipe with careful deliberation. Thomas sat motionless now, the restless energy of youth replaced by the stillness of complete absorption. So they won the court case, Thomas said, but Mrs. Blackwell threatened them. What happened next? What always happens when wounded pride meets winter desperation, the judge said quietly. Things got worse before they got better. He struck a match, lit his pipe, drew deep. December came to High Valley like a hammer, and your great-grandmother learned that surviving judgment was one thing. Surviving Wyoming winter was something else entirely. December 1872, High Valley, Wyoming territory. The first blizzard hit 3 days after they returned from Pine Ridge. Grace woke to a world transformed. Snow had buried the valley under 4 feet of white silence. The temperature had dropped to 20 below zero, and the wind howled through the pines like the voices of angry ghosts. Jack was already up, had been for hours. She could hear him outside, the rhythmic sound of shovel against snow, digging paths from cabin to barn, from barn to woodshed, from woodshed back to cabin, creating lifelines in case the next storm hit before he finished. Grace fed Lily in the pre-dawn darkness, the baby latching strong now, drinking with the confident rhythm of a child who knew sustenance would continue. No more desperate, weakening cries, just healthy demand and satisfied contentment. Through the window, Grace watched Jack work, his breath coming in white clouds, his shoulders already dusted with fresh snowfall. He had been outside since before sunrise, would be outside until long after dark, because winter on the frontier didn't care about exhaustion. It demanded constant vigilance or it killed you. By noon, one of the horses was dead. Grace heard Jack shout from inside the cabin, dropped the bread dough she was kneading, and ran to the window. Saw him standing in the barn doorway, his posture speaking volumes. Defeat, loss, the weight of one more thing gone wrong. She wrapped Lily in blankets, pulled on her heaviest coat, and went to him. The mare lay in her stall, eyes already glazed, body still warm but growing cold. Jack knelt beside her, his hand on her neck, his face carved from stone. She was old, he said quietly. 20 years at least, Catherine's horse. She brought her from Boston. Wouldn't leave her behind, even though everyone said she was too old for the journey. His voice caught. Catherine loved this horse, rode her every day. And now, Grace knelt beside him, Lily bundled against her chest. She didn't say it would be okay, didn't offer empty comfort, just sat with him in the coal barn while he grieved another loss in a year already too full of losing. We still have one horse, Grace said finally, and the wagon. We can manage. If we need to get to town fast, then we'll find a way. We always do. Jack looked at her, something shifting in his face. You say we now, like you're staying, like this isn't temporary. We're married, Grace said simply, for strategy or not. That makes this my home too. Your problems are my problems. Your losses are my losses. That's what partnership means. Jack stood, helped her to her feet. I'll need to butcher her before she freezes solid. We can't waste the meat. Grace nodded, understanding the practicality of frontier survival. Nothing was wasted, not even grief. That night they ate horsemeat stew, tender and rich, Catherine's beloved mare transformed into sustenance that would help them survive the winter she hadn't lived to see. The second week of December brought worse. Wolves, Grace heard them first. Their howls cutting through the night like knives. Close. Too close. Jack was already moving, grabbing his rifle, pulling on boots. "Stay inside," he said. "Bar the door after me. Don't open it for anything until I get back." "Jack, promise me, Grace, no matter what you hear, stay inside with Lily." She promised, watched him disappear into the darkness, then barred the door and sat with the rifle across her lap. Lily sleeping peacefully, unaware of the danger circling outside. The gunshots came 20 minutes later, 3 in quick succession, then silence, then 2 more, then nothing. Grace waited, every muscle tense, the rifle ready, counting heartbeats, counting breaths, counting the seconds until Jack either came back or didn't. The knock on the door made her jump. "Grace, it's me. Let me in." She unbarred the door. Jack stumbled inside, blood on his hands, his coat, exhaustion written in every line of his body. "Got 3 of them," he said. "The pack scattered. They won't come back tonight." "You're hurt." "Not my blood. One of them got close. Had to use the knife." He stripped off his coat, started cleaning his hands in the wash basin. "I'll need to check the livestock in the morning. Make sure they didn't kill anything else." Grace heated water, made coffee, watched him drink it with shaking hands, the adrenaline wearing off, leaving only exhaustion behind. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for protecting us." "It's what men do," Jack said, simply, without pride or false modesty, just statement of fact. They protect what matters. The 3rd week brought the crisis. Lily woke screaming, not her normal hungry cry. Something else. Something wrong. Grace felt her forehead burning, fever raging through the tiny body. "Jack!" Her shout brought him running from the other room. "Something's wrong. She's burning up." Jack felt Lily's head, his face going pale. "We need a doctor." "The nearest doctor is in Cheyenne. 3 days ride in good weather. We'd never make it through the passes in this snow." "Then what do we do?" Grace's mind raced, remembered fragments of knowledge from other women, from her own mother, from desperate nights with her own dying son. "Cool water," she said. "We need to bring the fever down, and I need to keep nursing her. Even if she fights it, her body needs fluid." They worked through the night, taking turns, Grace nursing Lily every hour despite the baby's weak protests, Jack bringing cool water, bathing Lily's burning skin, changing blankets soaked with sweat. At 3 in the morning, Lily's temperature spiked higher. Her cries weakened to whimpers, and Grace felt terror colder than any winter storm. "She's getting worse." Jack's face was gray. "Grace, if she doesn't make it." "She'll make it." Grace heard the certainty in her own voice. Willed it to be true. "My body kept her alive once. It'll do it again. I won't let her die. I won't." She nursed Lily, spoke to her, begged her, commanded her to fight. "You're named after a flower with thorns, little one. That means you're a fighter. So fight. Fight for your papa who loves you. Fight for your mama who died giving you life. Fight for me who chose you. Fight, Lily. Please fight." At dawn, the fever broke. Lily's skin cooled. Her breathing eased. Her eyes opened, focused on Grace's face with recognition, with trust, with the absolute certainty of a child who knew she was loved. Grace burst into tears, sobbing with relief so profound it hurt. Jack wrapped his arms around both of them, his own face wet, his shoulders shaking. "You saved her again," he whispered. "Grace, you saved her again." They stayed like that, the 3 of them tangled together, until Lily got hungry and demanded breakfast with healthy, insistent cries. February brought a thaw, brief but welcome, and with it a rider from Pine Ridge. Grace was hanging laundry when she saw him coming up the valley. Young, maybe 18, riding a paint horse and carrying a leather satchel that marked him as courier. "Letter for Jack Morgan," he said, handing over an envelope sealed with official wax, from Judge Carlisle. Said it was urgent. Jack tipped him, sent him to the barn for water and rest, then opened the letter with hands that trembled slightly. Grace watched his face change as he read. Saw anger, then disgust, then something harder, more dangerous. "What is it?" "Mrs. Blackwell." Jack's voice was tight, controlled. "She's written to the territorial governor. Claims Judge Carlisle was biased. corrupted, demanding a new hearing with a different judge. Grace felt her stomach drop. Can she do that? She's trying, using every connection she has in Cheyenne and Denver, pulling strings, making noise. He handed her the letter, but Judge Carlisle already responded, put his reputation on the line defending his ruling, told the governor the whole story. The governor dismissed her complaints. Relief washed through Grace. So we're safe. For now. Jack folded the letter, tucked it in his pocket. But she won't stop. People like Mrs. Blackwell don't accept defeat. They just change tactics. He was right. The question was what those new tactics would be. March 1873 arrived with the kind of sunshine that felt like promise. The snow melted. The creek ran high and fast. The meadow turned from white to brown to the first hints of green. Lily turned 6 months old. Grace marked the milestone by weighing her. 14 pounds, up from the 4 pounds of dying infant Jack had carried into Millridge Market Square. Healthy, thriving, hitting every milestone the midwife book said she should. She could sit up now, could babble in nonsense syllables that Grace and Jack treated like profound wisdom. Could laugh. Real belly laughs when Jack made funny faces or when Grace sang silly songs. The transformation was complete, from dying to thriving, from skeletal fragility to chubby baby rolls, from gray skin to rosy cheeks. Grace's body had done that, had taken a child at death's door and pulled her back, had proven every word of Mrs. Blackwell's accusations wrong. The ranch was transforming too. Jack had hired a drifter named Sam, young, strong, willing to work for room and board plus a small wage. With help, Jack could focus on the bigger projects, expanding the herd, repairing fences properly instead of quick patches, building the addition to the cabin that would eventually become a proper nursery. Grace's garden flourished. Potatoes, beans, squash, carrots. Everything she planted seemed to grow with abandon, as if the land itself was celebrating the winters survived. The battles won, she taught herself to ride. Jack's remaining horse was a gelding, gentle, patient with her inexperience. She started with short rides, just around the meadow. Lily strapped to her back in a sling Jack had fashioned from canvas and leather. Then longer rides, down to the creek, into the forest, building confidence, building independence, becoming the kind of woman who could survive out here without constant protection. Jack taught her to shoot better, not just fire warning shots, but actually hit what she aimed at. They set up targets, practiced until her shoulder ached from recoil, until she could hit a can at 50 yards more often than not. Out here, Jack said, watching her reload. Women need to shoot as well as men, sometimes better, because the things that threaten us don't care about propriety or who should do the protecting. Their partnerships solidified through shared work, shared purpose, shared acknowledgement that they were building something neither had planned but both valued. One evening in late March, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Jack spoke. I trust you with my life, Grace. You know that. And I trust you with mine. I mean it. If something happened to me, I know you'd take care of Lily, would keep the ranch going, would survive. You're stronger than you know. Grace didn't know how to respond to that, so she just reached over, took his hand, and they sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged overhead. April brought Emma Harper. She arrived without warning, riding a borrowed horse, her face pale, a purple bruise darkening her left cheek, her right eye swollen nearly shut. Grace saw her coming up the valley and ran to meet her, already knowing, already feeling rage building in her chest. He hit you. Emma nodded, couldn't speak, just nodded and started crying. Grace helped her down from the horse, led her inside, settled her at the table while Jack took care of the animal. Lily crawled over, curious about the visitor, and Emma picked her up, held her, sobbed into the baby's soft hair. He was drunk, Emma said finally. Started yelling about the hearing, about how I embarrassed him, made him look weak in front of the whole town. I tried to leave. He grabbed my arm, twisted it. When I pulled away, she touched her face, winced. He said I deserved it, for being a disloyal wife, for choosing you over him. Grace felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. You're staying here, as long as you need. I can't, I have children. They're with my sister right now, but I can't leave them permanently. Then we make him stop. How the law doesn't care when a man beats his wife. That's private family business. Jack spoke from the doorway, his voice quiet, dangerous. Sometimes the law isn't enough. He grabbed his hat, his coat, started for the door. Jack, what are you doing? Going to Millridge, going to have a conversation with Nathan Harper. You can't just, can't I? He turned, and Grace saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Pure, cold fury. He beat a woman for telling the truth, for standing up when it mattered. That's not private business. That's wrong. And wrong needs correcting. Emma grabbed his arm. He'll kill you. He's twice your size and mean when he's drunk. Then I guess I better make sure he's sober when I find him. Jack rode out within the hour. Grace watched him go, with her heart in her throat. Terrified, but also something else. Proud. That her husband's strategic marriage or not was the kind of man who stood up for what was right, even when it cost. He returned the next evening, knuckles bruised, lips split, but walking steady. What happened? Found him at the saloon, waited until he was done drinking, followed him outside. Jack tested his jaw, winced. He got some good hits in, I'll give him that, but I got more. Did you? Kill him, no, but I made it clear, crystal clear, that if he ever touches Emma again, I'll come back, and next time I won't stop with fists. He looked at Emma. You can go home now. He won't hurt you again. How can you be sure? Because I broke his arm, and while he was crying on the ground, I explained exactly what would happen if I heard he'd laid hands on you. He understood. Emma started crying again, but different tears. Relief. Gratitude. Thank you. I don't know how to... You stood up for us when it mattered, Jack said simply. This is me returning the favor. June brought heat and morning sickness. Grace woke one morning and barely made it to the chamber pot before vomiting. The second morning was the same. The third. By the fourth morning, she knew. Pregnant. Terror and joy warred in her chest. Another chance, another baby, but also another risk, another opportunity for her body to fail, another child she might lose. Jack found her sitting on the bed, Lily playing at her feet, tears streaming down her face. Grace, what's wrong? I'm pregnant, he went very still. You're sure? Morning sickness, missed monthly bleeding, breast tenderness beyond what nursing causes. Yes, I'm sure. He sat beside her, took her hand. And you're afraid. Terrified. What if I lose this one too? What if my body... Hey. He turned her face toward his, made her meet his eyes. Listen to me. Your first pregnancy was bad luck. The midwife said so. The doctor said so. There's no reason to think this one will be the same. But what if... Then we face it together. But we don't borrow trouble, Grace. We don't live in fear of what might happen. We prepare. We hope. We trust that your body knows what to do. And if it doesn't, then we survive that too, the way we've survived everything else. He pulled her close. But I believe you're going to be fine. I believe this baby is going to be healthy. And I believe we're going to raise 2 children in this valley. Lily and whoever this one turns out to be. Grace wanted to believe him, tried to believe him, but fear was a living thing in her chest, growing alongside the baby, feeding on every memory of loss. The doctor from Cheyenne came in July, examined Grace thoroughly, pronounced her healthy, the baby developing normally, due in late October or early November. Your first pregnancy was unfortunate, he said. Breech birth, underdeveloped lungs, neither of those were your fault, and neither are likely to repeat. You're strong, healthy. This pregnancy should proceed normally. Should. The word carried so much weight, so much hope and fear tangled together. Jack started building. A proper addition to the cabin. 2 new rooms, one for Lily, one for the new baby. Working every evening after the day's ranch work was done. Sawing, hammering, creating space for their expanding family. Grace watched him work, watched him build a future with wood and nails and sweat, and slowly, carefully, she let herself hope. August brought Mrs. Blackwell's final play. Grace was 7 months pregnant, moving slower, tiring easier, but still capable, still strong. Jack had ridden out early to check the trap lines. A full day's work. Maybe longer if the hunting had been good. He'd left Grace with the rifle. Instructions to stay inside, keep the door barred. But it was hot, stifling inside the cabin. And Lily was fussy, wanting to be outside, wanting to play in the grass. Grace relented. Let them sit on the porch. Lily in her lap, the rifle leaning against the railing within easy reach. Sam was in the barn, doing something with the horses, close enough to hear if she called. She didn't see the men until they were already in the yard. 3 of them, rough-looking, not from Millridge, not from anywhere Grace recognized, riding horses that looked stolen, wearing guns that looked well used. The leader dismounted, walked toward the porch with the easy confidence of a man used to getting his way through intimidation. "Ma'am, we're here for the child." Grace stood, moved Lily behind her. "Get off my property. Now don't make this difficult. We got paid good money to bring the baby to Denver. Family there wants to adopt her. Give her a proper home." "She has a home. Get off my property." The second man dismounted, started moving to flank her. "Come on, lady. Hand over the kid. We don't want trouble." "Then you shouldn't have come here threatening my daughter." Grace grabbed the rifle, raised it, aimed at the leader's chest, her hands steady despite her racing heart, despite the baby kicking inside her, despite Lily crying behind her. "Last warning. Leave now or I start shooting." The leader laughed. "You won't shoot. Women like you don't have the—" Grace fired. The bullet hit 6 inches from his boot, kicking up dirt, making him jump back. His laughter died. "Next one goes through your knee," Grace said, her voice cold, certain. "Then your partner's knee, then the third one's. You'll all be crippled. I'll still have my daughter. Your choice." The third man had circled around, was trying to come up behind the porch. Grace heard him, spun, but pregnant and off balance, she wasn't fast enough. He grabbed Lily. The baby screamed. Grace lunged, but the man shoved her, hard. She fell, her pregnant belly hitting the porch boards, pain exploding through her abdomen. "Got the kid!" The man ran toward the horses, Lily shrieking, reaching for Grace with desperate hands. Grace tried to stand, couldn't. The fall had knocked the wind from her, pain radiating from her belly. "Please, God, don't let me lose this baby. Not now. Not like this." Sam burst from the barn, saw what was happening, started running, but he was too far, too slow. The men were mounting, about to ride, about to disappear with Lily into the wilderness. And Grace was helpless, broken, failing again. Then hoofbeats, thundering up the valley, moving fast, too fast for safety, Jack on his gelding, riding like the devil himself was chasing. Or like he was the devil chasing. He saw the men, saw Lily in the stranger's arms, saw Grace bleeding on the porch, and something in him snapped. He didn't slow down, didn't even slow down, just rode straight at the man holding Lily, used the horse as a battering ram. The impact sent the kidnapper flying. He hit the ground hard. Lily tumbled from his arms. Jack was off his horse before it stopped moving. Caught Lily before she hit dirt. Passed her to Sam, who had finally reached them. Then Jack turned on the kidnappers. What happened next wasn't a fight. It was violence, pure and controlled. Jack broke the first man's arm. The snap audible across the yard. Broke the second man's jaw. Left the third unconscious in the dirt. The leader tried to run. Jack caught him, dragged him back, threw him to the ground and put a knee on his chest. "Who sent you?" "I don't—" Jack pressed harder. The man gasped for air. "Who sent you?" "Blackwell, Mrs. Harriet Blackwell, from Millridge. She paid us $200 to take the kid to Denver, to an orphanage. Said you'd stolen the baby, that she was rescuing her." Jack hit him, once hard enough to break his nose, then stood. Grace, she was still on the porch, clutching her belly, blood seeping through her dress. Jack ran to her, dropped to his knees. "The baby." "I don't know. I fell. Jack, I'm bleeding." He lifted her, carried her inside, laid her on the bed. "Sam, ride to Pine Ridge. Get the doctor. Tell him it's an emergency. Go now." Sam rode out, taking the best horse, pushing it hard. Jack stayed with Grace, held her hand, watched blood soak through blanket after blanket. "I'm losing it," Grace whispered. Just like before, my body's failing again. No, you're strong, the baby's strong. You are both going to be fine. But he didn't sound certain, and Grace could feel it, feel something wrong, something breaking inside her. The doctor arrived 6 hours later, examined Grace, his face grim. The bleeding is slowing, that's good. The baby's heartbeat is strong, also good, but you need complete bed rest. No getting up except to use the chamber pot. No lifting, no work, for the next 2 months, until this baby comes. Will the baby be okay? If you follow my orders. Probably. Your body took a hard impact, but it's protecting the baby the way it should. But another fall, another shock, and you'll lose it for certain. Grace nodded, tears streaming. I'll do whatever you say. Jack sat beside her after the doctor left. This ends now. I'm going to Millridge. I'm going to that church. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows what Mrs. Blackwell did. Jack. No arguments. She hired men to attack my pregnant wife and kidnap my daughter. That's not moral crusading. That's criminal. And she's going to answer for it. Sunday morning, Jack Morgan walked into First Methodist Church of Millridge during services. The congregation went silent, shocked. The mountain man they'd called dangerous standing in their sanctuary. Mud on his boots, anger in his eyes. Mrs. Blackwell sat in her usual pew, front row, flanked by her sons, surrounded by the town's most influential citizens. Jack walked straight to hers, stood in the aisle, raised his voice so everyone could hear. You hired men to attack my wife and kidnap my daughter. Gasps rippled through the congregation. Mrs. Blackwell stood. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. 3 men, from Denver, paid $200. They sang like birds when I broke their arms, told me everything. How you hired them. How you told them I'd stolen Lily. How you planned to disappear her to an orphanage where I'd never find her. That's absurd. I would never. I have a signed confession. Jack pulled papers from his pocket, from all 3 men, witnessed by the sheriff in Pine Ridge, detailing exactly what you paid them to do. Reverend Sterling stood. Mrs. Blackwell, is this true? I was trying to save that child from... By hiring criminals, another voice from the congregation. By attacking a pregnant woman. By kidnapping an infant. Martha Sullivan stood, her voice shaking but clear. How is that moral? How is that Christian? The congregation turned, looking at Mrs. Blackwell with new eyes, seeing past the respectability to the cruelty underneath. I was protecting that child, Mrs. Blackwell insisted, her voice rising, becoming shrill. That woman couldn't keep her own baby alive. She drove her husband to suicide. She's living in sin with a mountain man. Someone had to what? Jack's voice cut through her tirade. Someone had to hire thugs. Someone had to put my wife in bed bleeding. Someone had to terrorize my daughter. He looked around the church, met eyes of people who had judged him, who had refused to help when Lily was dying. You want to know about sin, about moral corruption? Look at your moral leader. Look at what she did in the name of righteousness. Reverend Sterling moved to Mrs. Blackwell. Harriet, I think you should leave. How dare you? Leave now before I call the sheriff and have you arrested for conspiracy. Mrs. Blackwell's face flushed dark red. She gathered her skirts, moved toward the aisle, her sons following. But the congregation didn't move, didn't make space, made her push past, made her feel every eye judging, every whisper condemning. At the door, she turned back. This isn't over. Yes, it is, Jack said quietly. You've lost your reputation, your standing, your power, all of it, because you couldn't accept that sometimes the people you despise are better than you. Mrs. Blackwell fled, her sons trailing behind, and the congregation sat in silence, absorbing, understanding, realizing they'd followed a tyrant in the name of morality. After service, several people approached Jack, apologized. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to know the tide had turned. Jack rode back to High Valley, back to Grace and Lily, back to the family he'd fought for, and won. October 1873, High Valley. Grace went into labor on a Tuesday. 14 hours of pain that felt like her body was tearing itself apart. Emma Harper served as midwife. experienced now, confident, talking Grace through each contraction with steady certainty. Jack held Grace's hand, wiped sweat from her forehead, tried not to think about Catherine, about labor that went on for 3 days and ended in death. But this was different. Grace was strong, the baby positioned correctly, everything progressing as it should. Push, Grace! One more push! Grace screamed, pushed with everything she had, and felt the baby slide free. A wail filled the cabin, strong, healthy, the sound of life demanding to be heard. "It's a boy," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. "A beautiful, healthy boy." She placed him on Grace's chest, and Grace looked down at her son, at the baby who hadn't died, who hadn't failed, who was pink and perfect and breathing and alive. "Daniel," she whispered. "His name is Daniel, after my father." Jack leaned over them, touched his son's soft head with one calloused finger. "Daniel Robert Morgan, after your father and your first husband, honoring the past while building the future." Lily toddled over, 13 months old now, walking, talking in simple words. "Baby, your brother," Grace said. "Daniel, can you say Daniel, Daniel?" "Close enough." Lily touched the baby's hand, gentle, curious. "Baby Daniel." Grace burst into tears. Not from pain, from joy, from relief, from the overwhelming gratitude of a woman who had believed she would never get this moment, and now had it, had everything she'd stopped letting herself want. "My body didn't fail," she whispered. "Jack, my body didn't fail." "It never did," he said. "The world just tried to make you believe it had." 2 years after the day Jack Morgan carried a dying infant into Millridge Market Square, Grace stood on the cabin porch, Daniel on her hip, 4 months old and chubby, healthy, thriving. Lily chased chickens in the yard, 2 years old and fearless. Both children evidence of battles won, of lives reclaimed from judgment. Grace's hand rested on her belly, 3 months pregnant again. Another baby due in the spring. No fear this time, just certainty. Her body knew what to do. Jack worked on the fence line, strong, healthy, the ranch prospering, 50 head of cattle, new barn, expanded cabin, everything they had dreamed of building. He saw her watching, waved, smiled, that slow, genuine smile that made her heart skip even after 2 years of marriage. She waved back. Movement at the valley entrance caught her attention. A rider coming up the track, familiar. Judge Carlisle on his gray mare, making his annual visit to check on the family that had changed his understanding of justice. Grace went to meet him, helped him down from his horse, brought him inside for coffee and fresh bread. "You look well," the judge said, studying her with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I am well, we all are." "And Mrs. Blackwell?" "Moved to Denver to live with her daughter. We heard she died last year. Alone, no one came to her funeral." Judge Carlisle nodded. Pride and cruelty make poor companions in old age. Jack came in, shook the judge's hand. The two men had developed respect over the years, based on shared understanding of what mattered, what was worth fighting for. They talked through the afternoon, about the ranch, about the children, about the future stretching ahead like an unwritten book. As the judge prepared to leave, he turned to Grace. "You know what you did, don't you, by stepping forward that day, by choosing courage over safety? I saved Lily. You saved yourself. You proved that worth isn't granted by others. It's claimed through action, through choice, through refusing to believe the lies people tell about you." He mounted his horse, tipped his hat. "You're an example, Mrs. Morgan, to everyone who thinks they're too broken to be whole, too damaged to be valuable. You're living proof that the world is wrong. And you are enough." He rode away, leaving Grace standing in the golden afternoon light, her children healthy, her husband strong, her life full in ways she'd stopped believing possible. She thought about the woman she'd been, selling bread from a corner table, invisible, accepting judgment as truth. And she thought about the woman she'd become. Wife, mother, fighter, survivor, someone who had looked at death and said no, someone who had looked at injustice and stood up, someone who had claimed worth when the world said she had none, The transformation wasn't magic. It was choice. Daily choice to believe she mattered, to fight for what mattered, to build something good from the ruins of loss. Grace Bennett Morgan had claimed her worth, and she would never let it go. Pine Ridge, Colorado, September 1932. Judge Carlisle finished his story, set his pipe aside, and looked at his grandson with eyes that had witnessed 60 years of humanity at its worst and best. Thomas sat silent, processing, the black eye and scraped knuckles forgotten, transformed from rebellious teenager to thoughtful young man in the space of one afternoon. "So that's why you wanted to tell me this story," Thomas said finally, "because I got in a fight defending someone. Because you stood up when it would have been easier to walk away, just like your great-grandmother did." The judge leaned forward. "Honor isn't about never being afraid. It's about doing what's right despite the fear. Your great-grandmother was terrified that day in the market square, but she stepped forward anyway. What happened to her? You said she died before I was born. Lived to be 79, died in 1919. Peaceful, in her sleep, surrounded by 6 children and 19 grandchildren. Your mother Lily was her firstborn, the baby she saved. And Jack lived to 85, died in 1922. They had 49 years of marriage, built one of the largest ranches in Wyoming County, were respected throughout the territory, became the kind of people everyone came to for advice, for help, for example." The judge smiled. "Mrs. Blackwell died alone and bitter in Denver, but your great-grandmother died beloved, surrounded by the family she built through courage and choice." Thomas absorbed this. "You're saying the fight was worth it. I'm saying defending someone who needed defending is always worth it. Even when it keys. Your great-grandmother gave up everything. Her home, her security, her comfortable invisibility. But she gained something worth infinitely more." What? Her life. A real life. Not just survival, not just existence, but purpose and meaning in the knowledge that she mattered. Judge Carlisle stood, moved to the window, looked out at Pine Ridge changing with the times, cars replacing horses, electric lights replacing oil lamps, the frontier dying into memory. "The world is changing, Thomas, getting modern, getting civilized. But some things don't change. The need to stand up for what's right, the importance of defending those who can't defend themselves. The truth that our worth comes from our action, not from other people's opinions." He turned back to his grandson. "You fought a boy who was hurting someone you care about. You got expelled from school. Your future is uncertain. But you did the right thing. That matters. That will always matter. Just like it mattered when your great-grandmother stepped forward in that market square 60 years ago." Thomas stood, moved to stand beside his grandfather. "I'm going back to school. I'm going to apologize for the disruption, but I'm not going to apologize for defending her." "Good." Judge Carlisle clapped him on the shoulder. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Grandpa, yes, thank you for telling me about her, for showing me that being strong isn't about never being afraid or never failing. It's about standing up anyway." The judge smiled. "That's wisdom, son. Wisdom your great-grandmother paid for with 2 years of hell and 1 afternoon of courage. Honor it by living it." Thomas left the study, walking taller, understanding more, carrying the weight of legacy earned through battle. Judge Carlisle returned to his chair, picked up his pipe, but didn't light it, just held it. Remembering a market square in 1872, an obese woman everyone had dismissed, a dying baby, and the moment everything changed. He had witnessed a lot in 90 years. Court cases, land disputes, murders and thieves, and the full spectrum of human capability for good and evil. But the bravest person he had ever met was still Grace Bennett, a woman who had looked at judgment and rejection and loss and said, "Not this time." A woman who had claimed worth when the world said she had none. A woman who had built a legacy through choice and courage and the stubborn refusal to stay invisible. The judge lit his pipe, drew deep, and smiled. Some stories deserve to be remembered, deserve to be passed down, deserve to become the foundation upon which new generations built their understanding of honor and courage and worth. Grace Bennett Morgan's story was one of those. And as long as he lived, Judge William Carlisle would make sure it was never forgotten. because some truths were eternal.